Let's talk about a fascinating cat and mouse game that's happening all over the internet, right under our noses. It's this constant battle between web automation and the systems built to sniff it out. And right at the heart of this invisible arms race is something called the Selenium fingerprint. So here's a thought for you. What if that automation tool you're using, maybe to test an app or scrape some data, is basically broadcasting its identity to every single website it visits? What if, without you even realizing it, it's just shouting, "Hey, over here, I'm a bot"? Well, that's the exact problem we're going to unpack. All right, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll get into what this Selenium fingerprint actually is. Then we'll play detective and see how websites are able to track you. After that, we'll look at the tricks for going undercover and, crucially, why even the best disguises can fall apart. And finally, we'll take a peek at what comes next in this never-ending game. So let's get right into it. The Selenium fingerprint. The best way to think about it is like, well, digital footprints. Every time your script visits a site, it's not just passing through silently, it's leaving behind this little trail, a series of invisible clues that pretty much give the whole game away. So what is it really? A Selenium browser fingerprint isn't just one single thing. It's a whole collection of different signals and tiny characteristics that an automated browser gives off. When a website's security system sees all these things together, it just screams automation. And why should you care? Well, because websites are actively hunting for these fingerprints. It's how they block data scrapers, stop bots from creating fake accounts, or just keep their servers from getting overloaded. So for anyone working in this space, getting detected basically means game over. Okay, so that brings us to the next big question. How exactly are websites playing detective here? Well, they've got a whole toolkit full of tricks designed specifically to spot these automated browsers. Let's pull back the curtain and see what clues they're looking for. And what's really wild is just how many different clues they're looking for. They check for really specific technical stuff, like a JavaScript property called navigator.webdriver. They look for weird things, like a browser that has 0 plugins, because, what real person has 0 plugins? They even analyze your behavior, how the mouse moves, how fast you type, and all sorts of other little fingerprinting details. And check this out. This is the real kicker. Sometimes it's incredibly simple. In a totally standard Selenium session, this navigator.webdriver property is automatically set to true. For you and me, it's false, or it just doesn't exist. So a website can run this one tiny check, this single line of code, and boom, it knows. It's the digital equivalent of finding a smoking gun. But it gets way more advanced than that. The really sophisticated systems are literally watching how you behave. See, a person moves a mouse in these slight natural curves. A basic bot, it draws a perfectly straight line. We type and scroll at slightly different speeds. A bot can do it all with inhuman, perfect timing. And those little differences are a dead giveaway. All right, so we know how they catch you. The next logical question is, how do you hide? And that brings us to the art of deception, going undercover. This is where developers start thinking like digital spies, trying to make their bots just blend in with all the regular human traffic. The whole strategy here is to mimic a normal user as closely as you can. You start with the easy stuff, hiding that WebDriver flag and making sure your user agent looks like a normal Chrome browser. But the real art comes in faking the behavior, programming in random little pauses between clicks, simulating the way a real person moves a mouse, and even setting a super common screen size. It's all about disappearing into the crowd. Now, you could try to code all those disguises yourself from scratch every single time, but who has the time for that? That's where some really clever tools come in. Things like Selenium Stealth are basically a pre-packaged disguise kit. It applies dozens of these little fixes for you automatically. It's a huge time saver. But here comes the plot twist. Even with all these clever tricks, all these disguises, stealth can fail. And it often does. Because in this digital arms race, you're not just trying to fool a simple script. You're going up against some seriously tough opponents. See, the problem is, the goalposts are always moving. The stealth script that worked perfectly yesterday might get you blocked tomorrow. Why? Well, the very tool Selenium relies on, like its WebDriver, can fall just a little bit out of sync with browser updates. That creates tiny little inconsistencies that the detection systems can pounce on. And ironically, sometimes trying too hard is the giveaway. Some systems are now smart enough to detect the very act of hiding. And who are these unbeatable opponents? we're talking about the heavyweights. Google's reCAPTCHA, Cloudflare's bot protection, these enterprise-level services like Perimeter X, they're incredibly sophisticated. And of course, big social media platforms have entire teams of engineers whose only job is to detect and block automation. Your stealthy little script often doesn't stand a chance. So this constant back and forth has forced an evolution. If Selenium is becoming too easy to spot, even with a disguise, what's the next move? Where does the game go from here? Well, let's look at the next generation of spies that are just starting to enter the field. The whole landscape is shifting toward newer tools that were really built from the ground up for this modern web. You've got frameworks like Microsoft's Playwright and Google's Puppeteer, which are often just better at stealth right out of the box. But the real game changer is a totally different way of thinking. Instead of trying to make an automated browser look real, some new tools just let you automate an actual, unmodified browser, one that has no telltale signs of automation to begin with. In this table just lays it all out so clearly. With your classic stealth Selenium, your detection risk is still pretty high and you're constantly having to update things. But when you switch to a real browser approach, the risk plummets because the fingerprint is authentic, not faked, the setup is way easier, and the maintenance is basically handled for you. It's a completely different strategy. So let's just get to the bottom line. Can Selenium ever be a perfect ghost, completely undetectable? The answer, pretty definitively, is no. At its very core, its architecture requires WebDriver, and as long as that's true, the most sophisticated systems will always have a way to spot its shadow. And that leaves us with this one big final question. In this perpetual digital arms race, this constant battle of wits that's being fought every single second in lines of code, who's ultimately going to win? The code that's designed to hide or the code that's built to seek? The answer, I think, is going to keep changing day by day.